Okay, let's unpack this. If you've ever had a job where you felt disposable, or if you've ever loved someone so deeply that they became your greatest burden and your only reason for living, then this story is for you.
It really is.
This is a story about a man forced to execute his best friend. And it's not an act of betrayal, but a final, terrible act of pure mercy.
And I think that's the key word, mercy.
It is. And understanding the mechanism of that mercy, I mean, that's the key to understanding the dark, timeless side of the American dream.
What's so fascinating here is that we aren't just looking at, some historical fiction written almost a century ago, John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men. It really serves as a raw X-ray of how economic insecurity fundamentally poisons human connection.
An X-ray, that's a perfect way to put it.
Yeah, this whole story, it's centered on this shared fragile vision of self-sufficiency, right? But what it's really about is this grinding economic anxiety and profound social isolation that honestly echoes our current instability.
It really does. The fears the characters face, being disposable, losing your purpose, being replaced, I mean, it feels acutely modern.
Because they're rooted in a foundational economic truth that, really hasn't changed all that much since the 1930s.
Exactly. So we've done a deep dive into the source material, the literary analyses, the historical context, even the author's notes. And our mission today is to cut through its status as required reading and figure out why this book, which is essentially a perfectly structured little play, continues to hit us in the gut with such force. We're going to explore the life that inspired its creation, the crushing context of the Dust Bowl, and ultimately the inescapable trap that forces George to make that final, terrible choice at the riverbank.
It's the ultimate tragedy of responsibility. All of it set against the backdrop of total societal failure. And it asks a really profound question. What is the price of keeping someone else's hope alive?
Wow, yeah.
Let's start at the very beginning then. We have to understand the unique bond between the two men who carry this entire burden.
All right. So the setting is absolutely crucial to grasping the scope of the tragedy here. We are in the ranch country of Soledad, California.
A place whose name, by the way, ironically means solitude or loneliness in Spanish.
I was just about to say that. You can't make this stuff up. And the time is the middle of the 1930s.
And we really have to visualize this landscape. The entire American economic system had, for all intents and purposes, imploded. And these characters are adrift, not just geographically, but morally, too.
Right.
The protagonists are bindle-stiffs, that's the term for them. Transient laborers, carrying all their earthly possessions rolled up in a blanket.
Rididdle, yeah.
Drifting from ranch to ranch, job to temporary job. They are purely fungible labor. Replaceable.
Their movement defines them. They own nothing but the clothes on their backs and, I guess, a shared history of trouble left behind. Which brings us to the famous pairing, George Milton and Lennie Small.
Probably the most important dynamic duo in American literature, you could argue.
I think so. George is the small, sharp, worried one. He's the brain, he's the planner, the self-appointed guardian.
And Lennie Small is his physical and mental opposite. He is a giant of a man, just endowed with this incredible, raw, physical strength that he literally cannot comprehend or control.
He has no idea how strong he is.
None. And yet he possesses this simple, trusting, and dangerously innocent mind of a young child. They're this complex, often frustrating dynamic, but one defined above all by a fierce, necessary loyalty.
We meet them already settled into their weary, familiar rhythm by the Salinas River. George is constantly lecturing Lennie about the jobs they've lost, the places they've run from.
Especially that incident in Weed.
Exactly. The incident in Weed where Lennie got into trouble for touching a woman's dress because he just liked the soft material. Lennie is always distracted by that desire for soft things like the dead mouse he wants to keep in his pocket.
Just to pet it.
Just to feel the fur. And George's anger, it's so highly practiced, it feels like a ritual.
It is. It's a way he copes with the immense, suffocating burden of caring for someone who is incapable of caring for himself in this brutal, brutal world. He barks at Lennie, he complains about the life he could lead if he were free, but this whole fantasy is just a pressure release valve.
But the sources make it so clear that his sharp bark is purely a mask for a deep, unbreakable sense of duty. He fantasizes aloud about being free, having no one to look after, spending his pay in a saloon.
But he'd never do it.
Never. The truth is that his entire identity is defined by Lennie. He carries Lennie's work card, he vets every boss, he's constantly warning him, don't say a word, just don't talk. He has to guide Lennie through a world that has zero tolerance for error, for accidents or for innocence.
And what sustains them, the thing that makes their endurance possible, is the dream. It is the core premise of the novel. It's this shared vision, a story they tell each other over and over again, almost like a prayer.
Yes, a mantra.
A mantra against the darkness and the instability of their reality.
Yeah, I find that mantra absolutely fascinating because it's so rooted in physical ownership and permanence. Is that the only form of escape Steinbeck imagined for them? It's not just a retirement plan. It's a vision, a prayer recited over a meager campfire, always beginning with Lennie prompting George.
Tell me about the rabbits, George.
Tell me the story again.
That's a brilliant distinction. It is not ambition in the modern sense, it is salvation. The dream is of a small farm, a few acres of their own. No one can fire them. They're their own bosses. They harvest their own crops. Crucially, they have security.
That's the word.
In the context of the 1930s, that dream is their armor. In a world that sees them as completely disposable, just temporary units of labor, the farm is a powerful, almost spiritual declaration that their lives possess inherent permanent value.
And George paints the picture with such beautiful, loving detail. A whitewashed shack, a windmill, acres of thick green alfalfa, fat carrots, maybe a cow. It's a complete vision of Eden, but for Lennie,
It all comes down to one thing.
there is only one sacred, absolute promise. The rabbits. Soft, furry rabbits of all colors that he, Lennie, will be allowed to build hutches for and tend. That tactile joy, that responsibility, is their sole reason for enduring the grueling, dangerous labor.
And to understand the powerful, sometimes brutal authenticity woven into the story, we have to look at the author himself. John Steinbeck was a Californian through and through.
Oh, yeah.
Born and raised right there in the Salinas Valley. This wasn't some distant academic observer writing about poverty from an office somewhere. He wrote what he knew and what he had experienced in his own bones.
He wasn't just observing the Bindlestiffs, he genuinely integrated himself into their world. I found a source that noted he truly worked in these environments.
Precisely. He worked on the ranches and farms himself. He packed lettuce, he harvested sugar beets, and he lived among the transient workers he eventually chronicled. This direct experiential connection to the material is why the novel possesses such an unshakable authenticity.
So when George and Lennie are talking about the back-breaking reality of ranch work,
It's coming from the inside out, not from a research paper. Steinbeck had done that work.
and it wasn't just the setting he borrowed from life. The inspiration for his central characters came from a specific, haunting experience. And here's where it gets really interesting.
Yes.
The character of Lennie was inspired by a real man Steinbeck worked with on a sugar beet farm.
That's absolutely correct. Steinbeck recalled working alongside a powerful, gentle giant who was later institutionalized after he tragically killed a ranch foreman. And it was in a fit of unintended, panicked violence.
So not out of malice.
Not at all. Steinbeck was clearly haunted by this episode, realizing that this wasn't a criminal act, but a heartbreaking accident. He didn't see a villain. He saw a man whose innocence, when coupled with overwhelming, uncontrollable strength, became a fatal flaw in a world that had absolutely no tolerance for error. He saw the necessity of tragedy built right into that man's nature.
That real-life tragedy. It must have been incredibly difficult to translate into fiction without sensationalizing it. But Steinbeck had a unique structural idea for presenting this raw human material. One piece of source material noted that he intentionally designed the book as a play novelette.
Which is a beautiful description of his craft. He wrote it in 6 distinct, highly confined scenes that could be easily lifted onto a stage with minimal set changes.
So he was thinking about this stage from the very beginning.
Absolutely. And this structural choice is key because it fundamentally contributes to the claustrophobic intensity of the narrative. By limiting the action to just 3 main locations, the riverbank, the bunkhouse, and the barn, Steinbeck creates a deliberate feeling that the characters are trapped together.
Right, there's no escape.
Their fates are unfolding in a tight, unyielding timeline. There is no escape from the action, from the environment, or from each other.
That compression increases the dramatic tension exponentially because you realize these events must happen here, in this small place. And speaking of fate and destruction, we have to pause for a moment to appreciate the sheer determination involved in writing this particular tragedy because Steinbeck had a famous, bizarre setback right at the start.
The Toby incident, yes. It's a fun, if terribly frustrating, piece of trivia that highlights the precarious nature of creativity.
It really does.
Steinbeck's Irish setter, Toby, literally ate the first draft of the manuscript, chewed it to pieces.
Can you imagine?
He had to rewrite the entire thing, page by page, from memory.
An act of sudden, violent destruction and loss right at the inception of a story about sudden, violent destruction and loss. I mean, the irony is just...
It's incredible. You could argue that the forced rewrite that labor lost might have even deepened the central theme of how easily our most precious work and dreams can be annihilated, even by something you love, like a dog. And the destruction inherent in the author's own process perfectly foreshadowed the destruction that was overwhelming America in the 1930s, which is where we have to turn next. That theme of annihilation is captured perfectly in the book's title.
Of course.
Which, as many know, comes from the 1785 Robert Burns poem about a farmer's plow destroying the tiny nest of a field mouse. The core lines that define the fate of George and Lennie are, "The best laid schemes of mice and men often go awry."
It's the perfect banner for a story about inevitable, fated destruction.
Exactly.
So we mentioned the 1930s, but we need to dive into how truly awful the crucible of that decade was. This isn't just background noise. It is the overwhelming environmental force that shapes every character's anxiety and fuels the desperation behind the dream. It's really the source of the story's tension.
The historical context is everything. You have the immediate aftermath of the 1929 stock market crash, the cataclysmic crash, which just ended the relative prosperity of the Roaring '20s.
Gone overnight.
Gone. Banks failed en masse, personal fortunes evaporated, and a creeping economic paralysis gripped the entire nation, leading to staggering unemployment.
And for millions in the middle of the country, it wasn't just economics, it was nature itself turning against them. We are talking about the ecological disaster known as the Dust Bowl.
A nightmare. The combination of a decade-long drought and deep, destructive farming practices meant the delicate topsoil was just stripped bare.
Nothing to hold it down.
Nothing. So when the strong winds came, they created these monstrous rolling clouds of black dust, the black blizzards, that blotted out the sun, choked livestock and people, and rendered vast tracts of land completely unlivable.
Unbelievable.
Hundreds of thousands of families, the Okies from Oklahoma, Texas, Arkansas, were literally forced off their dying land, losing generations of livelihood.
And so they packed their lives into these dilapidated jalopies, following the desperate hope of Route 66 west to California. They were seeking a promised land, a place where the sun still shone and work was available.
But what they found was a place already overflowing with cheap labor and simmering resentment from the locals.
They weren't welcome.
The locals did not welcome them. They were seen as invaders, as competition for scarce jobs. They lived in squalid, unregulated camps by the roadside. Steinbeck, living among them and writing about them, realized that the true poverty of this era was far deeper than just economic hardship.
It was spiritual.
Exactly. It was spiritual.
Could you expand on that idea of spiritual poverty? How do you contrast the lack of material goods with, say, the absence of community, trust, and future planning?
Well, spiritual poverty is the complete erosion of hope and trust in a social fabric. Steinbeck was writing about a loneliness epidemic almost a century before we had the language for it in our modern, hyper-connected digital world.
Wow, that's a great point.
Men traveled alone because connection was seen as a profound liability. Trust was a luxury they simply couldn't afford. If you got sick, if you got injured, if you carried someone who was disabled.
Like Lennie.
Exactly like Lennie. You were immediately fired and tossed aside. Loneliness fostered suspicion and emotional defensiveness because every man had to guard the scarce resource of his job and his energy.
And this fear of liability is precisely why George and Lennie's fierce bond makes them targets, or at least objects of immense fascination and suspicion on the ranch. Everyone else is an emotional island.
But George and Lennie are not. And that is why the dream farm is so important. It isn't just land. It's immunity from the loneliness epidemic. It's a promise of permanence and unconditional acceptance.
So if that context is the environment, then the core theme of the novel is how that merciless environment crushes hope. Let's start with the American dream as their specific form of salvation.
The dream is essentially an anti-fragility mechanism. It's what allows them to endure the poor food, the grueling labor, the contempt of others, and the constant threat of unemployment.
It's what gets them out of bed in the morning.
It is. It's the declaration that their individual lives matter in a system designed to treat them as fungible, disposable parts. They aren't dreaming of riches. They are dreaming of a stable place where they cannot be fired.
The fundamental conflict of the novel, then, is loneliness versus connection. Everyone else on the ranch is an emotional island because they have learned that to connect is to risk being held back, or worse, to risk deeper pain when that connection inevitably fails.
And this brings us right to the core thematic anxiety of the ranch, what we can call the law of usefulness and disposability. This is where it gets really interesting, because Steinbeck makes this brutal law manifest in a single, prolonged, gut-wrenching scene involving an animal.
Oh, yes.
And this scene dictates the moral code that George must eventually follow.
We absolutely must talk about the dog incident because it is the engine of the plot. This scene defines the cruelty of the ranch environment better than any economic treatise could. Candy, the old swamper, has a dog he's had since it was a pup.
His one companion.
His only companion. And now it's ancient, half-blind, arthritic, and it smells terrible. It's his last link to warmth, to companionship, to the past.
But the ranch hand, Carlson, sees only a burden. He sees a useless animal that takes up space and fouls the air. So he starts this relentless, chilling campaign driven by pure, cold utilitarianism to get Candy to kill the dog.
The lines are just brutal. He ain't no good to you, he tells him.
Why didn't you shoot him, Candy? He even offers his own gun, framing the killing as an act of mercy to save the dog from its own suffering.
The pressure builds in that bunkhouse to an unbearable tension. Candy looks around desperately for someone to give him a reason, any reason, to keep his companion alive. But the other men, those lonely, guarded men,
They refuse to meet his eyes. They stare at the ceiling. They shuffle cards. They remain silent and complicit. They know the code.
even Slim, the man they respect, agrees, albeit with sadness, but he agrees that it would be a mercy killing.
And Candy's spirit just breaks under that crushing shared silence. It's not just the words, it's the consensus, the unspoken realization that in this environment, usefulness is the only metric of worth.
So Carlson takes the dog outside.
And the men try to busy themselves with cards. The slap of the pasteboard is so loud in the stillness, they're all just waiting for the inevitable. Candy is facing the wall, powerless.
And then the single gunshot echoes from the darkness, flat and final. And that silence that follows is deafening.
It really is.
That is the sound of complicity, and it is the sound of the unspoken law being violently enforced. The second you stop being useful, you will be erased. The ranch operates on a cold, brutal, economic logic.
It is the 1930s version of being downsized, replaced by automation, or simply put out to pasture. And Candy's profound, quiet grief isn't just for his dog. It's a preemptive mourning for himself.
He knows he's next.
He knows. He's an old man who lost a hand in an accident. He knows he is next in line for the bullet. The moment he realizes George and Lennie's dream might save him from that fate is why he clutches onto it so fiercely, investing his life savings and his future into their vision.
That scene is absolutely crucial because it establishes the price of mercy and the definition of disposability on this ranch. George, witnessing the agony of Candy, has now been given a clear preview of the ranch's moral code and the only way out of it.
Exactly. And the characters Steinbeck creates are archetypes, but they're also deeply human, each one trapped by circumstance or their own innate nature. They are figures pinned down by history.
Let's look closer at George and Lennie, the unbreakable bond. George's practiced anger is so complex. We've established it's a tool he uses to manage Lennie, but I wonder if George's own fear is part of that anger. Is his deepest anxiety that Lennie will be taken from him, leaving him adrift and alone?
That's a powerful insight. I think you're right. George is caught between this deep duty and the crushing desire for the freedom he constantly talks about. His frustration is a protective measure, both for Lennie and for himself.
For himself, how so?
If Lennie were gone, George would be just another lonely man. He'd be subject to that loneliness epidemic we talked about. Their bond, while restrictive, gives his life meaning and a narrative, a purpose the other men completely lack.
And Lennie's fatal flaw is the heart of the tragedy. It's the sheer force of his innocence coupled with strength he cannot control. He seeks comfort, the soft mouse, the puppy, the gentle hair, but his clumsy, affectionate efforts to cherish these things result in their immediate destruction.
He is a victim of his own terrifying, beautiful nature.
Absolutely. Then you have Slim, the head mule skinner. In a world full of cynical, petty men like Curley and Carlson, Slim possesses what the source calls quiet majesty. He is the closest thing to natural royalty on the ranch.
And his authority isn't based on force or violence, right? It's based on deep understanding and fairness. He's the quiet observer, the thoughtful listener. His judgment is the only one the other ranch hands truly respect, making him the moral compass of the story.
So when the climax comes,
Slim's presence and his final judgment of George are the most crucial validation George receives. He's the confessor.
And Candy, the old swamper, he's the embodiment of the ranch's systemic anxiety. He fears being deemed too old to be useful, and his life savings become the financial core of the dream farm. He doesn't just invest money.
No, he invests his terrified hope into George and Lennie's vision, making the dream threefold, and thus, I think, 3 times more fragile.
That's a great point. And this fear infects the most isolated man on the ranch, Crooks. He's the stable hand, the only black man, segregated in a small, cramped room off the barn.
And he's armored himself with this proud, intellectual, defensive bitterness, surrounding himself with books as a defense against the painful need for human connection that the white men on the ranch explicitly deny him.
What's so fascinating is that moment where the barriers briefly dissolve. When the 3 outcasts, Lennie, Candy, and Crooks, share the dream. Crooks initially tries to test Lennie, right? He even torments him.
He does, with the cruel hypothetical of George abandoning him, trying to inflict the crushing loneliness he feels every single day.
But Lennie's disarming innocence breaks through that armor, and when Candy offers his money, the dream becomes tangible. It moves beyond just a white man's fantasy, and Crooks, briefly, allows himself to be included. He dares to imagine a place where the pervasive prejudice and segregation might not apply.
It's this beautiful shared moment of fragile hope.
It is.
Yet that hope is violently crushed the moment Curley's wife appears and reminds Crooks and everyone of the cruel social hierarchy. She threatens him with lynching, casually demonstrating her superior status based purely on race and gender, and Crooks immediately retreats back into his shell of bitter, defensive isolation.
It shows how fragile hope is against the entrenched prejudice and power dynamics of the ranch. Which brings us to the 2 catalysts, Curley and Curley's wife. Curley is a small man boiling with insecurity, a classic Napoleon complex. He uses his position as the boss's son and his fists to prove a toughness he doesn't possess.
He's constantly compensating for his small stature, and the confrontation where Lennie crushes his hand is shocking and visceral. Curley, sensing an easy target, starts beating Lennie, who's just terrified and confused. But when George commands him, "Get him, Lennie,"
Lennie instinctively protects himself, taking Curley's fist in his massive hand. The sickening crunch of bone is a horrific display of the dormant danger within Lennie, and it sets the inevitable tragedy in motion by establishing Lennie as a real physical threat.
And Curley's wife, profoundly, is the other catalyst. The men immediately label her a tart, a source of trouble defined only by her relationship to her volatile husband.
But Steinbeck strips away that label, revealing a figure of deep, desperate tragedy.
Absolutely. Her life is a collection of shattered dreams. She hates her miserable marriage, trapped in a loveless situation in the middle of nowhere. Her own dream of becoming a movie star, escaping the farm life, and achieving glamour, that dissolved long ago.
So her constant appearances in the bunkhouse, at the barn, they're not acts of seduction.
Not at all. They are desperate, almost frantic cries for human connection in a world that renders women, particularly those trapped on a ranch, completely invisible and without agency.
Yeah.
She is just as lonely as Crooks, but she expresses it in a different, more destructive way.
She is dangerous not because she is evil, but precisely because she is so desperately lonely, seeking solace in the one place she is explicitly forbidden to be. And that is where her broken dream collides with Lennie's broken nature.
Steinbeck's craft is often overlooked because the story is so raw and emotionally accessible, but the literary techniques are what make the tragedy so ruthlessly effective and structured.
We discussed the play novelette structure. We need to emphasize how that structural choice creates the feeling that the characters are trapped together. The fact that we return to the riverbank, the place of safety where the dream is first told for the final tragic moment, it just reinforces that circular trap.
Exactly. The structure provides no release valve. The events are inevitable because the geography is compressed. Beyond structure, Steinbeck uses powerful symbolism and motifs to mirror the inevitable destruction that awaits them.
The dream is the primary motif, the constant hope and mantra that keeps George and Lennie going. But the progression of the animals is the most tragic, symbolic cycle. The mouse, Candy's dog, the puppy, and Lennie's sacred rabbits.
Let's analyze that progression. Each animal represents softness and vulnerability. Lennie seeks tactile comfort, gentleness, and ownership of something small. But his inherent nature ensures he accidentally destroys them all.
The mouse is small, quickly gone. The dog is an ancient, scheduled mercy killing, an act witnessed by George. The puppy is Lennie's personal responsibility, destroyed by his own clumsiness.
And then, the ultimate soft thing Lennie destroys, Curley's wife. It's a tragic progression where the stakes of accidental destruction rise incrementally, mirroring his inability to handle the fragility of life and the frailty of the dream itself. The cycle of accidental destruction is always present, building toward the inevitable.
It's all foreshadowing.
All of it. And the title, as we noted, anchors this entire framework of fated destruction. The title's origin, from Robert Burns' poem, ensures the reader understands from the very start that the best-laid schemes of mice and men often go awry. This signals a theme of inevitable fate, that their failure is written not in moral terms, but in the harsh, unforgiving soil of the Salinas Valley. They never stood a chance.
Finally, we must appreciate the power of silence, which is more effective than any dramatic scream. Steinbeck doesn't use melodrama. He uses the single gunshot, flat and final, in the killing of Candy's dog. This technique is repeated at the climax.
It is. And the deep silence that follows forces the reader to internalize the ranch's brutal, emotionless code. The reader has to sit with the finality and the horror, making the emotional impact last much, much longer.
So let's talk about that climax. The trajectory toward it is set up with such agonizing inevitability. For one brief, shining moment, the dream is tangible because of Candy's money. It moves from fantasy to possibility.
Which makes its destruction that much harder to bear.
It really does. But fate intervenes instantly, manifested through Lennie's inability to control his strength. Lennie accidentally kills the puppy in the barn, and he's grieving and terrified of George's reaction, having committed the one crime George explicitly warned him against.
And it is at this exact moment that Curley's wife finds him, drawn by his grief and loneliness. She sees a safe, unjudging listener, someone to whom she can unburden her failed Hollywood dream.
Two lonely people.
Two incredibly lonely people. And in a fateful, tender gesture, she invites him to stroke her hair, the soft thing he desires above all else. It is a moment of devastating irony, because they are both seeking comfort in the exact wrong person.
Lennie is overjoyed by the softness, but his powerful, clumsy hands become too rough. When she panics and screams, trying to pull away, Lennie's own overwhelming panic takes over. He tries to silence her, shaking her violently, clamping his hand over her mouth.
And in an instant, her neck snaps. The act is born not of malice, but of a terrified childlike panic. He wasn't trying to hurt her. He was trying to silence the sound that would bring George's disapproval.
He has destroyed the dream by destroying the object of the dream.
Precisely. The silence descends again, but this time, the consequences are final. The dream is not just gone. It has been brutally murdered, destroyed by the very nature of the man it was meant to save.
Regarding reception, while we don't have specifics on contemporary critical reviews in the sources, the key takeaway is why the book immediately became a classic upon publication. And it seems to be its unshakable authenticity.
That's it. Steinbeck's direct, hands-on experience on the ranches gave the novel a raw, undeniable truth that ensured it resonated with the working class then and continues to resonate today. It was real, and it was immediate.
Which brings us to the most brutal yet most profound moment in the book, George's final decision at the riverbank.
The riverbank, which was their sanctuary at the beginning, the place where the dream was first conjured, is now charged with suffocating dread. The lynch mob, led by a vengeful Curley demanding retribution, is closing in.
And George has this terrible calm. He knows exactly what the world, and specifically Curley, will do to Lennie if they get to him first. He chooses to deny the world that cruelty.
He finds Lennie waiting for him, just as he was always instructed, by the river, waiting for George to return. And George's act is not one of anger or retribution. He sits with his friend, and for the last time, he chooses to make Lennie's final moments a vision of heaven, not hell.
Wait a minute, though. We call that sacrifice, and it is undeniably merciful for Lennie. But wasn't George also escaping a life sentence of crushing, unending responsibility? Did he kill Lennie purely for Lennie, or to finally regain his own freedom and escape the inevitable pain Lennie would inflict down the line?
That's the tension that makes the climax so devastating.
Yeah.
You're right to ask that. George takes responsibility for the life he was guarding, but in doing so, he ensures his own freedom is a hollow, empty victory.
He's alone now.
Completely. He recites the story of the farm, painting the picture one last time. The shack, the alfalfa, the security, the rabbits. It is a final, beautiful lie, a gift of peace, an act of profound comfort before the end, ensuring Lennie dies believing his purpose was fulfilled.
And as Lennie stares into the distance, lost in the vision of the life they were supposed to have, George pulls out Carlson's pistol. His hand is shaking, not just from the weight of the metal, but from the weight of all his love and responsibility. The years of duty crystallized into this one instant.
This is the sacrifice. George is saving his friend from the world's cruelty by taking all of that cruelty upon himself. He pulls a trigger while Lennie is still focused on the joy of the rabbits, guaranteeing that the last thing Lennie ever sees is the realization of their dream. It's the ultimate act of mercy, costing George everything.
Leaving him alone, subject once again to that loneliness epidemic.
Exactly.
The final scene, contrasting the men who witnessed the aftermath, is perhaps the most crucial moment of literary analysis and lasting relevance. It's the contrast between Slim and Carlson.
Absolutely. Slim, the wise and perceptive moral compass, immediately understands the depth of George's sacrifice. He doesn't offer empty words, he offers absolution and confirmation of a shared humanity. You had George, I swear you had He is the story's confessor, the only one who sees the necessary mercy in the horror and the price of profound love.
And then there is Carlson, the man who shot the old dog, the man who represents the brutal, utilitarian code of the ranch. He looks at George's silent, profound grief and Slim's deep understanding in utter confusion.
Carlson is left with the novel's final lines, the ultimate question Steinbeck leaves us with. Now what the hell you suppose is eating them two guys?
He just doesn't get it.
He can't see the tragedy because he fundamentally does not understand love, sacrifice, connection, or profound grief. He is a product of the spiritual poverty Steinbeck diagnosed.
And that failure to understand empathy and connection is the story's enduring modern relevance. The question Steinbeck leaves us with, nearly a century later, is whether we, in our own hyper-isolated, disposable society, are any different from Carlson.
A very good question.
We are all bound by economic precarity now, whether it's gig work or housing instability. Do we fail to see the tragedy of those around us because we are too focused on our own survival?
Just to quickly recap some of the trivia that gives the book its flavor and ties its fate to its theme of destruction. We had the puppy that ate the first draft, Toby, the Irish setter forcing Steinbeck to start over.
Which only reinforced the theme of destruction and the high cost of labor.
Exactly. And of course, the fact that Lennie was inspired by a real man, a gentle giant whose innocence was his fatal flaw, giving the story its deep, painful grounding in reality. It ensures it was read as documentation, not merely fiction.
That leads us back to our final provocative thought for you, the listener. If George and Lennie's dreamline ownership and self-sufficiency was the protective story, the mantra they used against the economic precarity of the 1930s, a world defined by the instability of transient labor and the Dust Bowl.
Then what specific element of the American dream is still used today as our protective story against the modern instability of gig work, student debt, or housing precarity?
It's a great question. Is our dream today financial independence? Is it the perfect work-life balance? What story do we tell ourselves? That perfect, comforting lie to feel safe, useful, and not entirely alone in this complex, crushing world.
Food for thought.
This deep dive into Of Mice and Men shows us that the tragedy isn't simply that Lennie dies. The true tragedy is that the dream, the source of all their hope and purpose, had to die first. It's a profound journey into human isolation, the high cost of responsibility, and the brutal laws of a world that values usefulness over humanity.
It's a masterful piece of writing that, through its confined structure and powerful symbolism, demands the reader confront the essential question. What is the true meaning of mercy when hope is utterly extinguished? The sacrifice George makes is the ultimate testament to the profound cost of love in a loveless world.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. If you want to explore the source material for deeper reading, we highly encourage it. We'll see you next time as we unpack another story that shapes our world.